former judges and people from all aspects of the justice system on our board. So welcome and thank you so much for coming today. So we're going to be talking about a number of different things today, and the theme is going to be sort of beyond the headlines. So, people hear about lots of stuff in the justice system. Usually, there's an old saying, if it bleeds, it leads. That's a news media saying, but it's kind of also true of what people hear about the justice system, in that, lurid crime stories and stories of tragedy and things like that tend to be what people hear about the justice system, but there's a lot of things beyond the headlines that people don't necessarily know as much about or hear as much about. So we'll be talking about some of those today. We'll be talking about municipal courts. It's the part of the justice system, the court system, that people probably know the least about, but they're most likely to have contact with than any other part of the court system. It's the court system that deals with traffic tickets and petty offenses. Traffic tickets being, speeding, first offense OWI, things like that, but also petty offenses. It deals with those. Municipal courts deal with those as well. We'll be talking about also collateral consequences and expungement. Expungement being how you remove a criminal conviction from your record. We'll be talking about judicial elections and why judicial elections don't get as much headlines, especially those at the circuit court and municipal court levels. So circuit courts are obviously the court system in the trial courts that are located right over in the courthouse, a few blocks west of here. The trial courts are where criminal trials take place, civil trials take place, divorces happen, small claims actions happen, probate, evictions, all those kinds of things happen in the trial courts, the circuit courts. There are 40 plus circuit courts in Milwaukee County, so 40 plus judges, and a number of which are up for election every spring. The headline election in the judicial system tends to be the Supreme Court races that happen, for a Supreme Court justice once every 10 years. But every spring, there are a number of circuit court judges who are up for election in various counties around the state. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then if we have time, we'll talk about constitutional amendments. Constitutional amendments are also often on the ballot, sometimes in the spring, sometimes in the fall, depending on the proclivities of the legislature and what they're trying to accomplish with those constitutional amendments. We'll talk about the fact that they're not always just about what you see on the ballot, but sometimes there are sort of other themes and other reasons for those constitutional amendments to get on the ballot, and people are trying to accomplish things beyond amending the Constitution, arguably. So to get started on the court system. So everybody knows from civics class, right? You're in high school or middle school, that there are three branches of government, right? Legislative, executive, and the courts, or the judicial branch. What people may not be as familiar with is how the judicial branch is organized. So it's obviously headlined by the Supreme Court, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in Wisconsin is sort of the chief of the entire court system. And everybody's familiar with the Supreme Court. It gets a lot of attention when justices run for re-election, or judges or other lawyers try to get elected to the court, or sometimes are appointed if there's a justice who leaves halfway through a term. So the Supreme Court, people are generally familiar with. There's 7 of them in Wisconsin, and people are familiar with the sort of ideological makeup and the broad themes that go into those Supreme Court elections. People are not as familiar, at least I don't think people are as familiar with the fact that the intermediate level of appeals court is the Court of Appeals, and there are 4 different districts around the state. District 1 is made up of Milwaukee County itself, and there are a number of District 1 Court of Appeals judges who are also up for election from time to time. And that tends to be a little bit under the radar. People don't necessarily tend to pay attention to the Court of Appeals races. They're often uncontested. And people don't necessarily know when they're going into a voting booth what the Court of Appeals judge would do and who those lawyers are who are running for the Court of Appeals. So again, a little bit beyond the headlines. But what we're going to talk about here today, in terms of judges and judicial stuff, is going to be the circuit court and how those races are often uncontested. And even when they are contested, it's often very difficult to get information about exactly who these candidates are, who these judges are, what their records are, what might qualify them or not qualify them for serving as a trial judge, a circuit court judge in your local county. And then we'll also talk about municipal courts, and we'll do a lot of talking about municipal courts, partially because Wisconsin Justice Initiative concentrates a lot on municipal courts, because again, it's the court system that most people are likely to have actual contact with. If you want to go contest a parking ticket or a speeding ticket, that's where you're going to go. And it's also, to be perfectly honest, it's also true because Margo and I are both municipal court judges. We both serve as municipal court judges in North Shore communities, Margo in Shorewood, and I'm in Whitefish Bay. And so we have a little bit of knowledge about that court system as well. So Margo's going to start out talking a bit about municipal courts. Go ahead.
All right. I became a municipal judge in Shorewood after working for WJI for a couple of years, monitoring municipal courts and thinking that I could do a really good job based on like what I've seen, and I have some ideas of how things can be improved in my little community. So municipal courts, there are about 220 of them around the state, and they handle about 425,000 cases a year. And if you think about the fact that the Supreme Court, which gets a lot of publicity, handles maybe 25 to 30 cases per year, they're big, they affect the whole state. But it's not where people are really interacting with the courts. So the courts are, it's sometimes we have court oftentimes at night. I call it night court sometimes because I've had people doing calisthenics in the back. As they're waiting for their cases, you've got people coming from work with their kids in their work uniforms. It's just it's where people interact with the system, and about 99% represent themselves. And the outcomes in municipal court can have a lot of effect on people. Municipal courts are civil matters. There's no jail time imposed for the violations. The penalty is usually a forfeiture, some type of monetary amount. And then judges have the flexibility to order community service instead, payment plans, things like that. And that's where you'll find a great differentiation between judges and how they handle penalties other than forfeitures. So these are things like disorderly conduct, trespassing. In Shorewood, I have a lot of theft from the Metro Market, from Walgreens. Other places have a lot of truancy. So these are those issues that are being held. People are being held accountable at that very local level in the community. And then the judges there are not necessarily attorneys. So it's not a state requirement that the judge be an attorney. Certain municipalities require it. But for instance, in Shorewood, you don't have to be an attorney. And it makes sense if you think about the rural areas where there might not be a lot of attorneys, fewer who want to be the judge. And so I've seen insurance sales people be municipal judges in the northern part of the state, librarians. You'll find a variety of people. A lot of retired police officers.
Can I ask you a question of clarification?
Sure.
What's truancy? Is it just being late to school?
It's usually habitual missing school. So like missing school completely or leaving early on a habitual,
So it's minors.
It's school. It's usually, and it doesn't need to be high schoolers all the time. It could be middle schoolers too. I've had discussions with some people at the schools, and even the younger kids are sometimes held out of school to watch their siblings who are even younger, so that their parents can go to work. So there's a lot of reasons behind truancy. I don't have a lot of truancy in Shorewood right now. I think the school's trying to work with people, but during COVID and after COVID, it became a pretty big issue for some school districts.
So families get involved and parents are often.
Yes. So one of the things that's beyond the headlines is where your money goes if you pay a forfeiture. So this is an example of a $98.80 speeding ticket, and you might think, well, that just goes right to the municipality, right? That's how much the ticket costs. But really, the base amount for the ticket is $30. That will go to the municipality. And then there are all these taxes and fees added. So there's a penalty assessment of $7.80. That goes to fund law enforcement training. There's a crime lab and drug law enforcement surcharge of $13, which municipal court has very little to do with the crime lab usually. And that goes to fund the equipment and operations in the crime lab. There's a jail assessment of $10. As I said before, the penalty in municipal court is a forfeiture, not jail time. Yet every ticket that is coming through the court has $13 or $10 that goes to the jail and to supporting jail operations. And then there are court costs of $38, which do mainly go to the municipality to fund the court system, but $5 goes to the state for every ticket just to go into the general fund at the state. So you can think of these as taxes, and your $30 ticket has become $98.80 because of $68.80 in taxes and fees that are added on top of the base amount. So that's one of the things beyond the headlines on how the justice system is being funded in part by people who have tickets rather than just coming from the legislature. And so the true costs of our justice system are greater than what you may see in the budget in Madison. It's coming from the backs of people who are paying tickets. Right.
Okay. So the question that you might be thinking is, why are municipal courts sort of a social justice issue in a sense? Like, why is working in municipal court space kind of important for figuring out maybe we need to go to the next slide.
Yep.
Is that the next slide? Yeah. I can't tell where we are. Sorry. Yes. Okay, so why is it important to concentrate on the municipal courts, and why is that sort of a social justice issue? Why is that important for a progressive justice system? Well, it's true that Wisconsin does not allow jail time for municipal violations. It does allow other consequences, in some cases license suspension and things like that if it's an OWI first offense. But it does allow two important consequences if you don't pay your forfeiture. So you get fined $98, you get fined $1,000 for a very serious ticket in municipal court. You don't pay it either because of poverty or because you just don't pay it for whatever reason. There are a couple of consequences that judges can use to try to enforce those forfeitures. And one of them is a driver's license suspension, and then one of them is a jail sentence or a jail term or jail consequence. And so one of the things that Wisconsin Justice Initiative has done is really work hard in conjunction with other people in the municipal court space who have been sort of leaders on this for many, many years in trying to steer courts away from those types of consequences for unpaid forfeitures and towards alternatives that are less sort of punitive and will cause less, negative consequences in people's lives, right? So when I was a public defender back in the 1990s, one of the most common types of tickets for criminal offenses that we would deal with at the time was operating after revocation. So a person gets pulled over for a driving violation of some sort and they don't have a license, and their license operating privileges are in fact revoked. And oftentimes what would happen is that these would be poor folks, right? People who don't have a lot of financial ability to pay. and they would be facing jail sentences for driving with a revoked license. But as a lawyer, what you would often be able to negotiate with the prosecutor's office is a deal where they say, if they can get their license reinstated, we'll dismiss that ticket, right? We don't really want to send somebody to jail for operating with a revoked license. So as lawyers, public defenders in particular, representing indigent people, we would sort of have to try to untangle what is going on with a person's license. And oftentimes, untangling that knot would lead us to many, many forfeiture offenses for which they did not pay their fines and their licenses were suspended. So they might have started out with a retail theft shoplifting ticket that they didn't pay. They might have started out with a parking ticket they didn't pay. They might have started out with a trespassing or speeding or any other type of ticket that they didn't pay. They lose their license. They, try to figure out how to get it back, but it's a complicated process. They have to go down to court. They have to make a payment plan. Maybe they can't keep up with the payment plan. And so that those license suspensions compound. Then they drive without a license and they get stopped for driving without a license. They get points on their license for that. They ultimately get their licenses revoked. It turns into a big mess. And often the starting point is simple failure to pay a municipal court citation. So, there's been a big movement in the municipal court space to look at other alternatives than suspending licenses, particularly for financially challenged people, so that they don't get into this spiral where they lose their driving privileges, then they can't get to work, or if they get to work, they get stopped and they get another ticket and they can lose points and the whole thing snowballs. So there's been a movement, and the Wisconsin Justice Initiative has been sort of part of this movement to encourage municipal court judges to use things other than license suspension for enforcing those forfeitures. The same thing is true of jail, although jail is obviously an even more consequential situation. If you don't pay a ticket and the judge says, I'm going to issue a commitment for you, then you've got a warrant out for your arrest that if you get stopped for a speeding ticket, you go to jail, right? And it's because you can't pay the forfeiture or didn't pay the forfeiture. The Wisconsin Constitution theoretically makes it illegal to jail people for poverty issues, but this has been found to be okay as an alternative. And again, the Wisconsin Justice Initiative, together with other people in this area, have really worked to try to encourage judges to not use jail as a consequence of failure to pay forfeitures. Because again, it has a disparate impact for poor people who can't afford their forfeitures. It really impacts people who are, just trying to stay alive financially and keep a job and keep things in their lives, at a certain level of, avoiding chaos. So one of the things that we worked on is encouraging the county board to increase the amount of money that the county charges to municipalities for using that jail space, right? When their forfeitures are going to result in jail terms, to make the actual cost of the jail space be chargeable to the municipalities who are using it as a way to collect forfeitures. And also sort of changing the cultures in municipal court so that when the judge orders a forfeiture and it comes back it's unpaid, they use other alternatives to encourage payment other than license suspensions and jail terms. There's amazing debt collection processes that are available to us as municipal judges that basically are like a collection agency, state debt collection, and they will go after forfeiture amounts that are unpaid, but they'll do so with other ways than suspending licenses and imposing potential jail sentences. So those are the things that we tend to encourage in municipal courts currently, and Margo and I use those, I think, close to exclusively. Another issue in municipal courts, which is a social justice issue, is the use of court interpreters. Right now, in circuit court, if you are not English speaking and you go to court on a a misdemeanor case or any other case where your liberty is at stake, and you do not speak English and you need an interpreter, the court will provide an interpreter for you. They will provide an interpreter. Obviously Spanish-speaking interpreters are very common, but also Hmong interpreters, Russian interpreters, whatever it might be. The courts, circuit courts, will provide those interpreters, and they're required to do so. In municipal courts, they are not required to do so. Municipal courts, as Margo mentioned, many people, by far the overwhelming majority of people, come to municipal courts without lawyers. They come to represent themselves, if you will, and so they're there to try to navigate the system. And if they're not proficient in the use of English, they're sort of on their own, right? The courts are not required to provide court interpreters, and so what you get is a lot of times people will bring family members who are bilingual to court with them. Oftentimes children, frankly, high school children, things like that, will come with their parents who are not English speakers. And they will say, oh, my son or my daughter will interpret for me. And it puts judges and, frankly, the court system in a really difficult position because it's not the best practice, obviously, to use a family member. You're sometimes communicating, important legal information about a person's rights, about consequences for court, potentially, driver's license suspensions and expensive forfeitures that they might have to pay, points on their license, all these types of things. And it's difficult to have confidence in the translation or the interpretation language-wise that a family member might be providing. I mean, they're obviously trying to do their best, but if it's a complicated legal term or something, it's difficult to do. There are services that are available, Google Translate and things like that. You can call a phone. There's a language line that you can use. But the Wisconsin Justice Initiative is working on this issue to increase the use of telephonic or other interpreters in municipal courts, and to make it, to encourage it, if potentially even making it mandatory that interpreters be available to people who are non-English speaking in the courts, so that we make sure that people understand their rights, understand the consequences, understand what's happening. Again, the most likely place that anybody's going to end up in court is a municipal court, rather than likely a circuit court. The other thing that is important about both municipal courts and also the circuit courts as well is the notion of collateral consequences. So what are collateral consequences? Well, if you get a citation in municipal court for something like retail theft, which obviously has a component of it of dishonesty, or just other types of theft can also be charged in municipal courts. A lot of people, think that, that's just a ticket, it's just a citation, it's just a fine that I'll have to pay. I'm not even going to show up in court to talk about it with the judge. I'm not even going to try to negotiate something with the prosecutor. I'll just pay it. Or maybe they go to court and they are convicted without really putting a whole lot of thought into it. But those convictions, even municipal court convictions, can have consequences downstream in a number of different ways that are can be adverse to someone living a productive life. So, for example, a theft conviction could bar somebody trying to become a nurse or a home health aide if that conviction is uncovered by an employer. They might have other consequences that they're just sort of not cognizant of because, again, they think of it as just a citation, just a monetary fine. It's not going to be something that's important. And it's not a criminal conviction. That's important to understand because it's a little bit sometimes difficult to sort of mentally wrap your head around because it sounds like a criminal conviction, right? Retail theft, trespassing, whatever it might be. It sounds like something that you would get a misdemeanor conviction for, but it's actually not. I always start my municipal court sessions with a speech about how these are not criminal convictions, they won't end up on CCAP, but they do still have potential important consequences. Because people don't always understand, like, well, my cousin got charged with retail theft, and they ended up down in the circuit court, and they got a public defender, and they were able to deal with it through the assistance of counsel. Whereas, and I'm sitting here in municipal court, and I have a ticket, and I'm not sure what to do, so I'm just going to take the conviction, and maybe there's a collateral consequence waiting down the line that you're not, excuse me, not totally familiar with. It's also important to understand that expungement or expunction is not available in municipal courts for ordinance violations, which is what these are. They're tickets, they're non-criminal. So you can't later come back and get the conviction removed from your record through an expungement process. There's sort of a limited way to do that with certain types of criminal convictions, but not municipal convictions. There is a way to sometimes reopen cases in municipal court. That's not as easy with criminal convictions, but formally expungement is not available. So the recommendation that I would make to people, anybody obviously, but that I always tell people in my municipal court, and I think hopefully the sort of word has gotten out in the municipality where I practice, that it's important to go to court. It's important, even if you don't have a lawyer, even if you're not sure you have like a defense, quote unquote, to the charge, it's important to go to court. You can really change what's going to happen, either in terms of the amount you might pay on a forfeiture, the points that might go on your driving record, the collateral consequences that you might look at down the line. I tend to do a lot of hold opens for people who have non-traffic ordinance violations, where they have to just do a little bit of community service and then the case gets dismissed at the end of it, so that those collateral consequences can be avoided. The municipality still gets to hold the person accountable through community service or some other mechanism, but we don't tag them with that quote unquote conviction, even for the ordinance violation, so that they don't end up with that blemish on their record that potentially could affect them down the line. If you don't go to court in municipal court, you'll be defaulted, and the face value of the ticket will simply become the forfeiture. And the points that are on the ticket, if it's a traffic ticket, will go on your driving record. So, probably 75% of the time, maybe even more, if you go to court, you'll be able to avoid some of those consequences. So Margo's going to talk a little bit more about some of the collateral consequence issues as well.
So collateral consequences, we talked about it in municipal court, but I want to just touch on circuit court and criminal consequences. So this chart shows that this is from data that comes from the Prison Policy Initiative using 2020 census data, and it shows that 79 million people have some criminal record. Now that is either a conviction of either a felony or a misdemeanor or an arrest record, so it includes arrest records. You may think that that can't be true, but I've looked it up like 4 different places, and that is about the number. If you think about 79 million people, we have just over 300 million people in the country. So 79 million is 1/4 of the US population that has some kind of criminal record. We are a very criminal-minded country, apparently. And if you take out children from the 300 and some million people, it's 1 in 3 adults has some type of criminal record. And Craig mentioned CCAP, so I'm not sure how many people are familiar with that, but that's an online way of looking up court records, and arrest records do go on that for a short period of time comparatively to a conviction, but a conviction will be on there. And even the municipal convictions, the misdemeanor convictions, all of that is available on a background check for jobs, and can affect employment. Most of all of the collateral consequences are ones that affect employment. But there are others. So convictions can mess up lives forever. They can last your entire life and prevent voting, housing availability for public housing, education, student loans are affected by felony convictions, holding office. I don't know if people saw Adam Purcell, who was put in charge of a city of Milwaukee committee, and he had to step down because it turned out that he could not have that position with a felony conviction. Immigration, and you're seeing a lot of immigration issues right now with people with very low level even offenses, and that is affecting their ability to become citizens and their deportation status. Government benefits, people in prison don't collect Social Security. There are other government benefits that evaporate if you have a conviction. Firearm possession, you probably have known that one. Professional licenses, a couple years ago, our executive director before me did some research and found out that, like, in certain states, barbers' licenses are prohibited. Like, they'll train people in prison to be barbers, and then they get out and they can't get a license because of the collateral consequences of their conviction. So it varies state by state, and as I said before, our executive director back in 2019 did some research and found almost 45,000 collateral consequences at the state and federal level across the country, and there were 650 in Wisconsin. So it varies state by state. You might have a criminal conviction in one state, move to another state, and you may have additional collateral consequences. So what can be done? Craig talked about expungement. That is removing, it doesn't mean that the conviction necessarily goes away, but in Wisconsin, there's a movement to remove that information from CCAP so that it's not available for employers to see after a certain number of years. Right now, under current law, you can apply for expungement if it was a nonviolent offense with a penalty of 6 years. The defendant was under 25 with no felony record prior. Defendant requested expungement at the time of sentencing. That's a big one. And then the later court grants a request for expungement after successful completion. In practice, it's very difficult to obtain. Even minor violations of supervision requirements can make somebody ineligible for expunction. And you must have paid all court costs and fines. And just as an example, a couple years ago we did a story at WJI about the Milwaukee Justice Center expungement clinic, which has people come in and they review their files and see if they're eligible. And out of 60 people in just 1/4 of a year who came in to ask for review, only 4 people were eligible and none of them actually got the expungement. I took your slide, but go ahead.
So a big aspect of the expungement issue that causes problems, I mean, there's a couple of them, but the biggest problem is that you have to ask for it under current law at the time of sentencing, okay? And the judge has to decide at the time of sentencing. So here you are, you're a criminal defendant, you're in court for a low-level felony offense or a relatively serious misdemeanor offense, and the judge is thinking about putting you on probation or sentencing you to a short term of jail or a fine or whatever it might be, and your lawyer says to the judge, "Judge, please expunge this conviction when he completes or she completes the sentence." And the judge says, "Well, okay, great. Let me take out my crystal ball, right? And let me look into the future and decide whether or not that person 5 years down the line is going to commit 5 more felonies or 6 more misdemeanor offenses, or if they're going to lead a crime-free life." And so the crystal ball gives them the answer and they can make that decision, right? It doesn't happen, right? So judges are very reluctant to say, okay, I'm going to take that case off your record after you could successfully complete your sentence, because they don't know what the future holds, right? So the current system makes no sense in that regard. So what can we do? What reforms are possible? Well, the city attorney here in Milwaukee, Evan Goyke, used to be a legislator, and he fought for years to reform the expungement law in Wisconsin. And he was going to make it, and he worked with Republicans on the other side of the aisle to try to promote legislation that would make much more sense in the way expungement would work. and it would allow people to apply for expungement later after their conviction was old. It would allow for getting rid of the age requirement, because right now you have to be 25 or under 25 at the time of the commission of the offense. And it would allow for expanded use of it for different types of offenses. And the thing that makes the most sense about it is the idea that you would be able to apply later in your life. Because typically what happens, so I'm a lawyer, I get calls from time to time. Hi, I have a case from, when I was 17 and I had a little bit of marijuana and I got a conviction for that, and now I can't do X or Y or Z because of that conviction. Can you help me with that? And my answer to them basically has to be, if it's a felony, you could apply for a pardon, but otherwise you're kind of out of luck. You don't have the opportunity to go back into court and say to the judge, look at the law-abiding life I've had since I was 17. Look at all the great things I've done. Can you just take this one little glitch off my record to allow me to, do X or Y or Z that I'm trying to do? This expungement reform would have allowed for that. It also would have clarified exactly what expungement means. Right now it's a little bit unclear, because basically it means sealing or disposing of the record of the conviction, but it's unclear whether the conviction actually still exists, even though it's sort of taken off the record. There's a little bit of lack of clarity in the law. Do you still have a conviction? Like on that job box, you have to press yes, but it was expunged, or what can you do? And there's other ways that people can access those police records and find, oh, but you got arrested, what happened to that case? You have to explain to your employer, well, I did get arrested, I was convicted, but I was expunged. It's a little bit complicated. The expungement reform that then Representative Boyke proposed would have taken care of some of those problems. So it's real reform, very important, outside the headlines again, but something that the Wisconsin Justice Initiative hopes to tackle again in the next legislative session after the elections, when the next legislature starts next January.
So we're going to turn to judicial elections. I know we're running out of time, so we want to get to this kind of quickly. So the Supreme Court of Wisconsin races generally make the newspaper. However, this year, the Marquette University Law School poll showed that only, as of mid-February, 6% of people knew much at all about the election that's on April 7th. So compared to last year, there was a lot more coverage and more interest in the Supreme Court race this year. It's very small, and we're only a few weeks out, and a lot of the public doesn't seem to know about it. Nevertheless, that race will get more coverage than the Wisconsin Court of Appeals races, the Circuit Court races, and the Municipal Court races. And just as an example, 26 Circuit Court judges are up for election this year statewide, and only 6 of those races are contested. None of them are in Milwaukee County, so you won't hear anything about that race most likely at all. Want to keep going?
Yeah, sure. You want me to we can just quickly go through this.
Yeah. So right now we have 24,000 people in Wisconsin prisons, and the judges who influence mass incarceration the most are circuit court judges, not that Supreme Court level. So the circuit court judges are involved in search warrant issuances, rules on motions to suppress, rulings on admission of evidence at trial. All of that adds up to how many people are being convicted, whether people get prison or probation, and then determining the length of the sentences. So the day-to-day cases are driving mass incarceration, not the higher level races, but those circuit court races.
Right, so I think that's a real important point, and I know some folks are getting ready to go to the next service, but just to briefly sort of conclude on judicial elections, here's a bunch of folks, and I don't know how many people recognize the folks there on the screen. Chris, you can't answer. That's cheating. Pete can't answer. So these are circuit court judges that will be on your ballot in about 3 weeks or 4 weeks on April 7th, right? One of them is not actually a circuit court judge yet, but she will be. Why will she be? Because she got the signatures necessary to put her on the ballot, and she was the only person who got the signatures necessary to put her on the ballot to run for the branch that she's running for, Branch 38. And that's Susan Roth in the bottom right-hand corner as you look at the screen. She's currently a court commissioner, very nice woman. Used to be a criminal defense lawyer. She's, I'm sure will do a wonderful job as a judge, but the point is she's running unopposed for a circuit court judge position, and so that was a missed opportunity for the citizens of Milwaukee County, not necessarily to elect somebody other than Susan Roth, like, who knows, like, she'll be a great judge, whatever. But it's a missed opportunity for us to have a conversation about everything that the justice system is about. Incarceration levels, mass incarceration, disparate incarceration, the Fourth Amendment, all these kinds of justice questions, social justice questions that are important to people in the city of Milwaukee. We missed the opportunity to have a conversation about that in the context of a circuit judge race for an open seat. Like the rest of those folks have all been judges for years, and it's perhaps understandable that they're not being challenged. Ideally, they possibly would be, but for an open seat especially, it's really an unfortunate aspect of our judicial system, if you will, that people don't step up to run for those spots, to have the opportunity to have a conversation for the voters of Milwaukee County and other counties, to have a conversation about what the circuit court judge does and how it affects justice here in Milwaukee County and in the state as a whole. So I think it's almost 11. Should we wrap up? Otherwise, we'll get into another topic, which I don't think I have time to discuss adequately. So,
Any questions?
If folks have questions, we'd be happy to take them.
There's some folks that are going to the second service.
Yeah. Question in the back. Go ahead.
We can stick around.
To any of these clearly not the municipal levels of court operate with juries?
Yes. So the question is whether the various levels of the justice system and courts operate with juries, and the answer is yes. In the circuit court level, so the trial court level, there are jury trials, particularly for criminal cases. Everybody obviously has a right to a jury trial in a criminal case. And in some civil cases, there are jury trials as well, but at the trial court level. So all those folks right there who are running for trial court level, circuit court level positions would be presiding over jury trials. In municipal court, you're only entitled to a jury trial for certain types of cases initially. And that's OWIs, and you have to file and pay a fee, and then your case is transferred to circuit court for the trial.
And you're using trial and circuit court as synonymous? Trial
court and circuit court is synonymous, right. And the circuit court is the trial courts in the state of Wisconsin, correct. Thank you. Yeah. Yes?
Do municipal courts handle housing issues, tenant and landlord issues?
No. Tenant landlord issues are handled in the circuit courts, so the trial courts, and they're generally handled in like small claims court. And some of the legal services organizations have, like Legal Action or Legal Aid Society, have special projects where they represent tenants, especially in eviction cases. So again, these are really important social justice issues at times, issues of poverty and disparate economic circumstances. And so how circuit court judges deal with those types of cases is very important. Court commissioners also deal with a lot of those cases as well in the circuit courts. Yeah.
Do housing code violations go first to municipal court?
Housing code violations do go to municipal court. Margo, I think, handles a lot of those, and those are sorted out in municipal court. Milwaukee Municipal Court is very, there's lots of housing issues in Milwaukee Municipal Court for various violations of building codes and things like that. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Can you talk more about your voter education efforts? I'd say I'm probably above average in terms of political involvement, and most judicial races, I have no idea.
Right. Thanks, yeah, thanks for that question. We do a lot of voter education stuff. I'm gonna let Margo talk about that. She's the executive director and she does a lot of this herself.
So on the Wisconsin Justice Initiative website, we have a blog, and the address for the website is on all the pencils and the magnets that I have at the door there, so you can grab one of those. And we send questionnaires to all the all the candidates in contested judicial races statewide. Now this year there are not any in Milwaukee County, but if there were, we would publish the candidates' answers to those questionnaires. So, so this year, like if you look on the blog, there is one for the Wisconsin Supreme Court. So if you want to read more, we ask them questions like, you know, name an important case from the U.S. Supreme Court or Wisconsin Supreme Court for the people of Wisconsin, or you know, why do you want to be a judge? Name a couple important cases that you've been involved in, either as a judge or a lawyer, and kind of, it's not just like a checkbox, like do you support this, do you support that? It's asking them questions that they actually have to think about and write about. So, so look for the questionnaire for the Supreme Court candidates on our website. And if you know people who live in Wood County, Dane County, we've got questionnaire answers for the candidates in those, and we do that every year. We also host candidate forums. So we had Chris Taylor from the Supreme Court talk. We do these monthly luncheons that Jerry referenced called salons. So we had Chris Taylor talk at one last fall. We just hosted a candidate forum down at the Milwaukee Bar Association with Maria Lazar. Those are the two candidates for the Supreme Court race. We hosted a candidate forum out in Dane County. There was a primary out there for that election. So we'll do that if there are contested elections in Wisconsin, but it's really one of the core things that WJI has been involved in since its inception back in 2015, is voter education about judicial races, because just as you said, people don't know anything about them. They'll walk in to the ballot box, they'll see all these names, some of them are uncontested, but if they are contested, like who are these people, what kind of judges are they, what kind of judges would they be, and voters just don't have a lot of information. And we're talking about it, it's gonna cost a fair amount of money, but we're talking about trying to do some kind of survey to create a report card about judges so that people can see about the judges that have been on the bench, you know, what kind of job they're doing in the eyes of the people who appear in front of them. It will take a lot of work on that, so it hasn't happened to date. And we also publish, the governor gets to appoint attorneys if there's an opening. He can appoint attorneys to the court to be judges. And we will do public records requests for those applications, and we will print those in our blog as well so that people can see the judges that the governor is appointing. And those people have to run for election in the next cycle. So the next year you'll have information about the appointees if they're running for re-election. So that's what we've been doing. We're always interested in hearing how else we can help with getting out information about judicial elections, because it's one of those gaps in voter education. People focus on those November elections and the partisan races, and these nonpartisan judicial races just go under the radar a lot of times, and people don't know who these judges are and who to vote for. Yes?
I live in Chicago, and there, because in Illinois, the judges had to get a certain percentage of votes to stay in office, to stay as judges. So it seems like here, though, there's no way to get rid of somebody who you don't like other than run against them.
Right, if they're not gonna retire, then you'd have to have somebody running against them, that's right. So it sounds like they have retention elections in Illinois. So different states do it differently, so some states appoint their judges and then the voters have retention elections to see if they agree to continue. Ours are just elected every 6 years for the circuit court, every 10 years for the Supreme Court. And you know, if somebody turns out to be not such a great Supreme Court justice, they could be there for 10 years. And then somebody would have to run against them and beat them. Yes?
Judicial elections, Supreme Court in particular, are supposed to be nonpartisan, but they aren't. Democrats vote for one candidate, Republicans, I mean, you can look at the two individuals right now. you know who's gonna be voting for who. How do I judge once somebody is elected, whether partisan or not, whether people are making decisions on the basis of the law rather than politics? I mean, it drives me crazy. I mean, I don't want any democratically elected judge to be making judgments on the basis of politics any more than I want Republicans. How do I judge decisions they make as reflective of justice?
It's right now very difficult, and Craig, you can jump in if you've got any better ideas.
You understand
but-
my question?
Yeah, I mean, let me repeat the question. The question is, how do you know whether judges are following the law and how they're deciding, and if they're elected but doing a job that you don't agree with, right? How do you know that? Is that essentially the question? So there's not a great way to know unless you know a lot of lawyers who appear in front of that judge, and that's not good enough, right? So it's really a matter of trying to fill that space of judicial education and I think, if we can get a report card of judges, even in county by county, that might help. But right now there's really no great way. Like Craig knows the criminal defense bar, and criminal defense attorneys talk about the judges who are assigned to felony court and misdemeanor court, and they can talk about how they appear in front of certain judges. But judges who appear in front of the civil court judges, so in Milwaukee, the judges for a couple years are assigned to different branches of, so they do the same types of law, right? Either in misdemeanor court or felony court or family law court or children's court. So people who would appear in that particular court frequently have opinions on the judges. But they don't necessarily spread them because they have to appear in front of those judges, and if word gets back to that judge, then they've harmed their own representation in the future. So a lot of times attorneys are tight-lipped about it, but they may talk about it within their own circles. But really, unless you know somebody who appears in criminal court all the time, who do you ask for how a judge on that court is doing? It's very difficult. Do you have any other ideas for how the public can learn about the judges and how they're doing it? I don't know that there is any great way.
Is the substitution rate and who substitute against a judge public knowledge? I know occasionally I hear those things, but I didn't know if that, because that's one indication. I would look, how often does the public defender staff substitute against a judge? That would give me a sense of their ideology and perspective and things like that. But is that stuff even available? The other thing is WJI at all with the resources at some point to do a report card?
We've been talking about it for about a year now, about how we get the resources, and I've applied for 2 grants that, hopefully we can get that done, to do that kind of report card, but it will take a lot of resources to do. So the comment was, do substitution rates give some information? And I think they do, and I think that information is available if you ask the court's office for it. So substitutions are, every litigant gets to choose whether to ask for another judge. They get to ask once. So if a case is assigned to a certain judge, one of the parties can move to substitute. And that, if you totaled up all the substitutions on a particular judge, you may get a good indication of whether people think that person's a good judge or not. So it wouldn't be complete information. Anyway, all right, I think that wraps it up. Thanks.